Everybody, it's JJ here and welcome back to the channel. Tonight we are going to be talking about my top 5 fantasy series before 1985, actually 1985 and prior. Now I am a big firm believer that if you are a reader of the genre or if you are a writer in the genre, then you really kind of need to get a firm grasp on the history of the genre and really understand and ground yourself in where we have come from. And I think sometimes a lot of people, they miss out on some of the classics and some of the things that came before in the 60s and 70s and the 80s, and they only think of like Tolkien or C.S. Lewis or maybe Terry Brooks, but there are tons of great fantasy out there before 1985. So these are my top 5 series. These are series that I think everybody should check out. But there is something I need to say. This is not going to include Tolkien. This is not going to include C.S. Lewis. And this is not going to include Terry Brooks and the Sword of Shannara. So, and part of the reason is because I think it's, just the idea that those 3 books, those 3 series sort of grounded themselves and have stood the test of time in many ways. And I think you could do a whole different video on discussing each one of those and how important they are to the genre, and we all know how important they are to the genre. So this is specifically outside of the scope of those 3 series. So number 1 was actually published in 1968, it looks like, and that of course is A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin. This is one of those like quiet masterpiece. All right, it's about a boy that goes to wizarding school in a way, but it's more than just your typical education of a wizard and things like that. There's much more going on here. This book is very poetic in many ways. It's the word choices, the sentence structure, the way Ursula Guin tells a story. It's beautifully written. And the cool thing about these books in the series is they're very short. This is probably only about 40,000 words, which to most epic fantasy authors today is probably a chapter, if we're being honest. But this is rich and it's really, really epic in its scope, and it's an amazing story. So I highly recommend everybody check this out. The Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula Guin. That is book 1 in the Earthsea trilogy. Now number 2, this is actually, I think it's a duology, and this is the newest book on the list. This is actually from 1985 and is by Barbara Hambly, and that of course is Dragonsbane. I mean, you want to know what a book is like with somebody who's having a midlife crisis and sort of going through that middle-aged time where they don't really feel like they matter anymore. This is an incredible, incredible story. It's the story where they're trying to find the only guy who's ever slain a dragon, and they're getting him to go on a quest to find one. If you have listened to Brandon Sanderson will actually say this is the book that got him excited about reading fantasy and made him fall in love with not only being a reader, but being a fan of the genre. So Barbara Hambly, Dragonsbane, excellent, excellent book. Now, this next one I think is one of the funnest books. Is that word funnest? Yeah, the funnest books I have ever read, and that of course is Dragons of Autumn Twilight, the book 1 in the Dragonlance Chronicles. This is just straight up, D&D adventure. That's what this is. It hits every single one of the tropes. You got the cranky old dwarf that's grumpy. You got the wise elf. You got the mage. You got the brute force. There is so many tropes in here, but they're so fresh and they're so fun and they're so enjoyable. This is one of those books that just makes you disconnect from the world and just enjoy something that is fun and adventurous. And so I always think Dragons of Autumn Twilight, very highly recommend it. Actually, I came to this book just in the past year. I never read any D&D growing up. It was just not something that I really got into. But somebody said you should check this out. And so I got the entire series. I loved it start to finish. Now, this next one was one of my favorites growing up. I probably read this for the first time when I was maybe 16, 17 years old. And that, of course, is David Eddings, the Belgariad, book 1 of Belgariad, The Pawn of Prophecy. Now, this is one of those things. This story starts with a farm boy named Garion, who is basically discovers he is his destiny is tied to this incredible prophecy. I mean, sure, it hits a lot of tropes, it hits a lot of archetypes and things like that, but it is an unbelievable series and it is very, very much worth investing your time into. It is not a long series at all. This was actually published in 1982, and in the early 80s, late 70s, David Eddings was like a phenomenal bestseller. He was as big as Robert Jordan was probably in the 90s, and probably Sanderson is now. Okay, maybe not that big, but he was up there in that scale. Very popular, worldwide, best-selling author. The Belgariad is something I think every fantasy reader and every fantasy author absolutely should read, because I think that this really helps ground you into what the fantasy genre is all about. Now, this next one, a lot of people are going to disagree with me on. And yes, technically, the series didn't end until like the early 2000s. But book one in the series was published in 1982, and I am a huge, huge fan of this series. And that, of course, is The Gunslinger, book one in the Dark Tower. This is the most genre-bending fantasy adventure I've ever been on. It is the story of Roland, the last gunslinger, on his quest for the Dark Tower. And on his quest, he forms his quartet, which is sort of like his fellowship in a way. It is some of the most unlikely heroes. It is modern day Western in a fantasy world, in a wasteland apocalyptic adventure, but also taking place and crossing over into our world, into like 1980 something New York. It is absolutely incredible. One of my favorite characters in all of fiction, Eddie, is one of the heroes of this story, and I think it's one of those that if you can get through book one, a lot of people think book one is very dry, and I do. The first time you read book one, it is very challenging to get through, but drawing of three, and then the wastelands and Wisdom Glass, that's where the series really takes off, is in book 2, 3, and 4, and you really start to delve into these characters. Nobody writes characters, I think, as unique as Stephen King. Yeah, he is a master at writing compelling characters that you want to root for. And honestly, at the end of the day, sometimes you look back and you think, these characters, they really aren't worth rooting for, but you root for them anyway because he's that good at creating these type of characters. I absolutely love this. I actually respect this book now, book one, The Gunslinger, after I have read the entire series and come back to do a reread. And so there you go. Those are the top 5 fantasy novels, 1985 and prior, at least where they got their start at, that I think every fantasy reader and every fantasy author should absolutely read. They're compelling, they're unique, and I think they really help ground you into the genre as a whole. So, let me know in the comments section what some of your favorite fantasy series are from the 60s, the 70s, even the early 80s. And be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Later.